I've erased the diagram again, and now it's time to start filling this up with some serious problems. So, coming down this river, we have sediment and we have waste. Okay, we've got nitrogen and phosphorus runoff from 10 billion cattle that live up in the watershed, and pig farms and chicken farms, and human sewage and garbage from cities and things like that, and roadways, and all sorts of chemicals that wash in from the highways and in industry and everything else. So we've got waste and a huge amount of nitrogen and phosphorus. Well, that all ends up here. And I'm going to see if I can get nitrogen and phosphorus. That's an N and a P. And that nitrogen and phosphorus is going to run down into this shallow water flats here. And what we're going to end up with is eutrophication, cultural eutrophication. And that's going to create a dead zone. Nearly everywhere that there is human development in an estuary area, particularly where a large river comes in, there's going to be a dead zone formation. One of the most famous here in the United States is called the Gulf Dead Zone, right here at Texas and Louisiana and Alabama, Florida. All across the Gulf of Mexico, there's what's called the Gulf Dead Zone. Stop this video for a moment and look up just a satellite image of the Gulf Dead Zone, and you're going to be pretty bothered by what you see. What happens is all this nitrogen and phosphorus comes into this shallow water area. There's a huge amount of sunlight, and there's this algae bloom, and it's green as this chalkboard. You can see underwater, it's just green, 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 green. And as that algae uses up the nitrogen and phosphorus, it's eating all this nitrogen and phosphorus, and it's exploding in population. It eats all that up, and then it stops raining, and all that nitrogen and phosphorus quits coming in, and it uses it all up, and then poof, it dies because it's used up all of its food source. So all that algae sinks to this shallow bottom, and it starts to decompose. The bacteria start decomposing the algae that have died, and in doing so, they use up all the oxygen in the water. And this is all happening in about 20 feet of water all at one time, and particularly on the bottom even, there's an area of like black water. And you get down below the green, and it just looks like Coca-Cola. There's just nothing down there at all because there's no oxygen. And it's, again, we've talked about that condition called hypoxia that happens when there's chronically low oxygen. And so you get a dead zone that's a hypoxic zone that's all up and down the coast because of the nitrogen and phosphorus runoff. Now, in a perfect world, there wouldn't be industrial fertilizers. There wouldn't be garbage. There wouldn't be feces in the water, stuff like that. And these coastal wetlands would absorb most of that. These miles and miles of plants, of these huge tall grasses, taller than head height, 10 feet tall, 8 feet tall, is going to start soaking all that stuff up. Mile after mile after mile, these plants are taking all that stuff out of the water. So by the time it gets to the estuary and the intertidal zone, they're supposed to be very clean, right? And you may have times of sediment runoff, but you're not going to have anywhere near the nitrogen and phosphorus runoff or the other petrochemicals and garbage that's coming in from human development. This system should work, but this is too much of a good thing running down. You need nitrogen and phosphorus in order to have plant growth. But like I said, it's too much of a good thing because in the watershed of the entire United States, there's way too much of this stuff being sprayed, too much feces running off and things like that. And it all ends up here. Speaking of the fragility of coastal wetlands, there's a couple of things that happen to coastal wetlands pretty much everywhere that they exist. And one of the worst things that happen to our coast, to the Louisiana coast, our meaning the United States, is that in order to make way for human development, people said, well, this is all kind of up and down with water. You know, sometimes it's dry, sometimes it's not. It's kind of swampy. You can't really build in it. but if we drain it, then it is really good soil. So then, we can have agriculture. So what they did was they started channelizing and making just miles and miles of canals that run through the marshland and drain the marshland, okay? Now, that was done when the United States was a completely agrarian economy. This was the richest soil in the United States. And so it made sense in a purely like short-term, how many cows can we get? How much rice can we get? How much cotton can we get in the short term, right now? And then ship it out to wherever. Then this made sense to do. We've got a huge shipping port at the Mississippi River. We got loads of alluvium. We got loads of growable soil. Why don't we just completely destroy the ecosystem and farm the living trash out of it? And that's what was done. Now, what happens in these canals is, first of all, it drains all the water, okay? All the water goes straight to the Gulf, and it never gets filtered by all the grass. That's what's supposed to happen. Miles and miles and miles of grass. I can't remember the explorer, I think it was De La Salle, said, "I've traded one sea for another." And he was referring to the grass, the miles and miles of marsh grass. And they drained it all, so it completely ruins the ecosystem services of the marshland. Doesn't do that anymore. It dries it all out. And all of the organisms that had adapted over millennia to this marshland habitat, then they start disappearing. Bird species were going extinct left and right. Amphibians, reptiles going extinct left and right, because this huge area of land got drained. And again, if there's cows here, well, the grass doesn't filter out that poop anymore, straight into the water, okay? And that causes these big giant dead zones. Now, one of the other things is people drive everywhere, right? And we ship things across here. If you got a ship that comes in and unloads off $10 million worth of whatever, then it's got to go somewhere. It's got to get shipped. And so there's roads. There's roads going all through the wetlands. Now, that disrupts the hydrology. This slow trickling flow of water down through the wetland, every time you build up the roadway and put an impervious surface there and you pack it all in to where it's nice and safe roadway, well, that stops the water from moving correctly. That impedes the hydrology, this natural slow flowing down of water through the wetland is roads. And then if you got channelized, sometimes you get water that's not flowing correctly, and sometimes you get water that's flowing way too fast and it's not sitting in the marshland at all. And these are both issues that coastal wetlands can face. And sometimes it's all of that. I've seen it happen to where it rains a whole bunch and water should be moving down through the wetland, and it hits a highway, and one side of the highway will just be like 2 feet of standing water, like a ton of it. And it sits there and it sits there and it sits there and it drowns all the plants and everything dies. And on the other side, everything's dry. And it's not getting the new nutrients that it needs. It's not getting fresh sediment. It's not getting the water that it needs. And then that starts to die. So then it's no good at all. Final big issue that I'll tell you about with estuaries, and there are many, many threats to estuaries, many, many threats. But one of the main ones is human development. We get out here and the beach, the storms are much too rough. You know, this stuff, these are constantly shifting, hurricane stuff come in, just wipe your house away. Oh, that's no good. And up here, it's, the river could flood and everything else, and it's just a river. There's loads of rivers, Well, I really want to see the sea, but I don't really want to deal with the sea. So the safest, nicest, calmest, cleanest water with the protected from the big waves and everything else is these estuaries. So people go, hey, why don't we just completely tear that down, push a little dirt in there, and put our lake house there, put our beach house there. So, that's a fabulous idea. And then loads of people just tear out the estuary, and they put their beach house there, and say, well, I don't want to drive anywhere to go to the bar. Let's put a bar there too. And I need some clothes. So we're going to build a whole shopping center right here where there used to be an estuary. It's great. You can see the beach from Target or whatever. And then all this development starts to build up, and the estuary gets systematically dismantled little bit by little bit by little bit by little bit by little bit, and it no longer does the ecosystem services correctly. It's no longer giving us the economic benefit, and without the plant stabilizing the soil, now it's a highly erodible soil, and you get shoreline erosion. And people's beach houses start getting washed away, and that loses value too. If you spend $2 million having a beautiful beach house built right in the middle of an estuary, and then within 20 years, the whole thing gets washed out and falls into the sea, well, all that money is lost. All that value is lost. It's not a property that's going to continue to gain value and be bought and sold and bought and sold and used for human habitation. It's garbage. It's now just rubbish in the sea at that point. It's just, stuff that is going to be derelict and left in the ocean. So nobody's going to clean it up, right? And if you take a look at sea level rise, now this is really more of a climate change kind of concept, but sea level rise is going to do the same thing too. Remember, the sea is rising. The sea is rising because of climate change. Look that up. Sea level rise. It's not actually part of this lesson, but it won't take you long to figure it out. So the estuary is being destroyed. The shoreline is being washed out to sea, and at the same time, the sea is getting deeper. So all of the human development here is sort of doomed to be lost anyway, and in the process of building it, it destroyed one of our most important aquatic and marine biomes. Now, it's not fully aquatic, it's not fully marine. It's some mixture, it's the most diverse habitat that we can get between the two. It's been destroyed, and for what? Because all of that coastal development will eventually be lost anyway. So it's really, there's no silver lining to it really. It's just a sad degradation. And what degradation means is to degrade, to break down, to fall apart, to crumble, if you will. That is to degrade. And this is called ecosystem or habitat degradation. Is this slow, over human history, dismantling, breaking down, fragmenting, breaking apart these ecosystems with highways, with channelization, with industrial agriculture, with coastal development, and all of these things, a little bit at a time. And a lot of people say, well, if you own a beach house, that's bad. Or if you, channelize or build a highway, it's bad. Well, the people that channelized it did not intend, they didn't wake up one day and say, you know what, why don't we destroy the world? Like this. They thought they were doing the right thing in the moment. Same thing with highways. Well, if I've got all sorts of things coming down to this beautiful port that we've built to increase economy, well, we've got to have highways. So the people that built the highways weren't evil, they were just, it goes back to the Lorax and the Onceler, right? They're out for an economic gain in their lifetime. And this is one of the real curses of mankind not living that long. We aren't, Tolkien's elves that are 1,000 years old, and we can see the errors of our ways and correct it, and we learn from the past. We don't, okay? And if had I not told you, you would probably have no idea that these things happened in history. All of this stuff has happened over the last 100 to 150 years. It is since the Industrial Revolution. And nobody involved really thought they were doing something that bad. But when you see the accumulation of it all come together, you go, oh, this is horrible. This is a horrible situation. And that's what makes it really tough. You can't lay blame. No one goes to jail over it, okay? And we live in a world now where everybody wants to sue over something or somebody to go to jail or whatever. That's just not how it works. It's a consequence of 1,000 choices, 1,000,000 choices by 1,000,000 different people over 150 years. But now that the situation is there, we can see it, understand it, and start to try to fix it.